asked me to talk a little bit about Yorktown. So the first question you have to ask is, how did we go from Lexington and Concord way up in Massachusetts in 1775 to Yorktown in 1781? So one thing you have to know about me is that things like battles or places don't exist all by themselves. You can't just say Yorktown, let's talk about it, okay? You have to say, how the heck did we get to Yorktown? So we're going to talk a little bit about how we ended up at Yorktown and what's the meaning of it. So you got the clicker or do I have the clicker?
I have the clicker.
Okay, your turn, time to click.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh,
Now, for those of you who heard my earlier talk about Princeton and Trenton, okay, which took place in December of 1775, okay? So now we end up down in Virginia at Yorktown. Now, this is just a highway map of going from Princeton and Trenton to Yorktown. You can do it in about 4 hours. No problem, no problem. It only took Washington 3 months to march that whole thing with his whole army. We're going to get to that in a minute. Okay. Stop drinking, push the button. Okay, now, so let's take a little look at what really was happening at that time. You have to understand how we got there. So first, the strategy of the British, okay? The strategy of the British, okay, was that after Trenton and Princeton, Christmas of 1775, armies went into what they call winter quarters. They didn't fight during the winter because roads were terrible. The troops were in pain and agony trying to keep warm, etc. So what happened was, after they went into these winter quarters, okay, now the British now look, what's their next move? What's their next move? They're sitting in New York, and Washington's army is sitting at Morristown, Jockey Hollow.
I have the sound. That's what that meant.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So there was a two-pronged approach by the British. Okay. The first prong, okay, was that they were going to take a British army from Canada under General Burgoyne, okay, and they were going to come march down the Hudson Valley through Lake Champlain, etc., all the way down to basically Albany. And then the British forces in New York were supposed to come up and meet them. Well, the British forces that were supposed to come up and meet them forgot that they didn't get the order. So at any rate, here comes Burgoyne marching down the Hudson Valley. Now, when you see this little thing of St. Leger over here, okay, that was the second prong. That St. Leger was supposed to meet up with Burgoyne, but they got stopped at Oriskany. Okay, so they never joined. They never joined. So here comes Burgoyne down. He now has a 300-mile logistical problem. He's surrounded by woods. He's surrounded by Continental militia. So now he's stymied. So now he gets down to just outside of Albany at Saratoga. Saratoga Court. Yeah. And so the first prong of the attack that comes from Canada, okay, gets big defeat at Saratoga. Big defeat at Saratoga. Now, here's why it's important. When the word gets to the French that the British have been beaten at Saratoga, France declares war on Britain. This becomes really important when we get to Yorktown. Okay, so now the British are in a war with the French and with the United States, at that point, the United Colonies. Okay, so now the second prong of the attack, okay, the British, those ones in New York who didn't come up to help to meet Burgoyne, okay, they do a second prong. They get in their ships and they go down to the Chesapeake Bay and they come up the Chesapeake Bay and they're going to attack Philadelphia from the south because they fell in love with places, not armies. Okay, they wanted to capture places. Okay. Keep going. So now, while Saratoga is happening up here, here the British are coming down, okay, and coming up Chesapeake Bay. You see how far up it goes? They're going to take Philadelphia. They're going to take Philadelphia. So now you have the second wing going up. So what happens next? Well, Washington knows that they're coming this way. So he wants to try and stop them, but he still has kind of an undisciplined force. So he tries to stop them at two major battles. Okay, the British, the major battles, okay, where go back one, will you? I'm sorry. Okay, the two major battles that take place are Brandywine and Germantown. Tries to slow the British down. Now Washington has to withdraw, okay, so he tactically slows them down, but this is where he goes to Valley Forge, because the British take Philadelphia, so they now have the capital, what's considered the capital of the colonies at this point, and Washington takes his troops to Valley Forge, and we all know the Valley Forge story. Okay. So, at Valley Forge, the most important thing that happens at Valley Forge is a guy named von Steuben. Diedrich, where are you? Okay, yeah, there he is. Okay, it's von Steuben. He's a German Prussian soldier, okay, who makes up a title, okay, because he relays into prince, okay, but he understands how armies fight, okay, and so where he is important, okay, is he develops, in essence, I'll get it right, the soldiers at Valley Forge into an army. How does he do that? Disciplined and training. And what he trains them to do is to load a musket, you know, which you got to load from the front, you know, push down. He taught them how to do it. They could fire 3 shots a minute doing that. He developed the whole manual that showed everybody how to do it, and he actually went out and taught the soldiers to do it. What is critical about this is that the rabble that went into Valley Forge comes out as an army that's disciplined, knows how to fight British style. There's this other guy that shows up at Valley Forge. His importance will show up a little bit later, but Lafayette, okay, arrives at Valley Forge and utters the name that, or the term that you may have all heard. It said, "Lafayette, we are here," when he announces himself to George Washington. He's going to become important as we get to Yorktown, Well, now the British are kind of stymied. They got Philadelphia, okay, but they don't have Washington's army. And so what happens is, everybody know where Washington Rock State Park is? Okay, have you ever been up there? Spectacular view. Well, Washington's army, remember, is up in Morristown. They can watch the British in their movements because of dust. And so they realize that the British are moving troops, okay? And so Washington now takes his new army that has come out of Valley Forge, okay, and confronts them. And where does he confront them? At Battle of Mammoth. You all know the Battle of Mammoth. Molly Pitcher, you know, taking over the cannon for her husband, which we don't know is true or not, but it sounds great, okay? But it is at this moment that the British recognize they now have an army that they have to fight, not a bunch of militia and rabble, because of what von Steuben has done, So this now changes the way the British are looking at things. They don't want to go head to head with Washington's army. So they take a new strategic step. They now send Cornwallis, you've all heard of Cornwallis, you're going to see him begin at Yorktown, right? They send Cornwallis down south to Charleston and Savannah. The thinking is that there's a lot of loyalists down south. And so if the British army comes down there, starts fighting, okay, then the loyalists will flock to the British standard. Doesn't happen that way. But, so now we have this isolated army, if you will, down south, moving pretty well, okay? So now Cornwallis starts a slow march through the south, but he runs into some problems through the south. Okay, so what happens is that Washington knows he's got a problem down south. So he sends Nathaniel Greene, his best commander, he sends south. Okay, and what Nathaniel Greene structures is a thing called the retreat to the Dan. Okay, the Dan is a river. You've heard of Dan River, Mills, and all that kind of stuff. To retreat to the Dan, which is basically a river on the Virginia-North Carolina border. And so what he does is he creates a fighting retreat. The whole idea is to sap Cornwallis's strength. So this is what he does, okay? We have the Battle of Kings Mountain in October 1780, Cowpens in January of 81, Guilford Courthouse, okay? What all these three battles do is suck the guts out of Cornwallis. He's losing people, he's extending his supply line, so he starting to have real problems, okay? Now, let's go to the next one. Now, this shows what Nathaniel Greene did. Look at the lines. Look at all the red lines. Look where they're going. Okay, and you see up there, Kings Mountain, Cowpens, okay, Guilford Courthouse, okay, so that he is wearing Cornwallis's army out. Brilliant move, okay? This forces Cornwallis, okay, to resupply his army. He has to go to the sea, because the only way you get resupplied is by the British Navy. So he goes to the sea. You see, he goes down here to Wilmington. And then you notice the red line that goes up. The British can't get into Wilmington, so he now seeks another spot, and that red line is going to Yorktown. Another spot where he can be supplied from the sea. It's his only hope. Now, I need to digress a little bit, okay? Remember we talked about the Battle of Saratoga way back, okay? In 1777, well, the combat commander who leads the turning point in the Battle of Saratoga is Benedict Arnold. He's considered the finest combat commander or on-site commander, okay, in all of the Revolution. So he is the lead person who leads to victory at Saratoga. Now, here's what happens. In 1780, when he becomes a traitor and goes over to the British side. And the British actually give him a command. So and the command that he gives him is a whole bunch of loyalists, okay, or Americans who stayed loyal to the British. So, okay, we've got We've got Cornwallis heading to Yorktown. Okay, so now, hopefully it's next slide. Washington knows he's got Cornwallis penned up in the south, okay? So what he does, okay, is he decides that he is going to move his entire army south. Going to leave New York, etc., with just minimum defense, going to move his whole army south. Now you have to remember, this is where the French coming into the war at Saratoga comes into play, because Washington takes his whole army, but he's got an additional wing. That wing is the French, who are in Rhode Island under Rochambeau, and he takes Rochambeau and his Frenchmen with him, and he takes them down to Virginia. It's a 3-month trip, folks, in those days with their army. Okay? So now he's got everybody moving south. This is where Benedict Arnold comes into play again. Washington's army has a 20-mile tail when he's bringing all his supplies, all his troops, the French, etc. He's bringing 15,000 troops with all their supplies, etc. So the tail is 20 miles long. Benedict Arnold screams and yells, attack them while they're marching. And the British don't listen. The British don't listen. So Washington is able to move his entire army to Yorktown. His entire army to Yorktown. This is that 20-mile tail I was telling you about. Okay? So Benedict Arnold could have been instrumental in the war at a couple of different places, right? Now, so this is what Yorktown is. Now, everybody thinks Yorktown's a big battle. It's not, folks. It's a siege. Nothing big about it. There's not big, combat stuff. There's not a lot of stuff. It's just a siege. A siege. Now, I want you to look carefully about the importance of other people in the battle, okay? Notice up here, there's Rochambeau with his Frenchman, right? See him up there? And then over here, we've got Lafayette. And we've got, who's this guy, von Steuben again? So the troops that are surrounding Yorktown are 2 Frenchmen and a German, all under Washington's command. Now, here's the hook. This is the York River up here. Okay? The British are hoping that the British fleet can come in and supply them. Only one problem. There's a French fleet out there, and the French beat the British for probably only the one and only time in their career, and they keep the British away. So consequently, we have Yorktown surrounded by the French fleet, by Rochambeau's troops, by Lafayette and von Steuben. They have no choice but to surrender. No big battles. Yeah, they fought some, but no big battles. So Cornwallis had to surrender. Keep going. Now, so he's cornered, okay? On October 19, 1781, the British surrendered to the Americans. Surrendered to the Americans. Now, here's the whole thing. This is considered the end of the war. It is not, okay? The war does not end until 1783. 1783. But what happens is that the British now pull in everything and they say, okay, we're not going to go fighting anymore. This war is in essence over. It's now just a question of time before we can come to what's called the Treaty of Paris, which ends the war. Which ends the war, okay? Now, some things that you might like to know. The actual war ends September 3rd, 1783, okay? And look at the people who signed it. Who signed it? Benjamin Franklin, John Jay, Henry Lawrence from South Carolina, okay? And John Adams. This ends the war, okay? Okay, while Washington's in command, actual battle commanders are French, German. French and German. And let's not forget the French fleet out there. It is reported that when Lafayette met General Washington at Valley Forge and introduced himself, he said, Lafayette, we are here, because his English was terrible. It's terrible. Now, a little sidelight. Lafayette returns to the Americans in 1825 and 26, took a tour of the whole country, 50-year anniversary of the Revolution, okay? He took back with him soil from Bunker Hill. He is buried in Paris in Bunker Hill soil, okay? He was so tied to the American cause, okay? When the Americans arrived in 1917, the beginning of World War I, a general went to Lafayette's grave and uttered the words, Lafayette, we are here. Isn't it interesting how things go through time? Just in case you don't know, Okay, I'm a graduate of Lafayette College and a military history major. Okay, don't know how my brother got in because he's an engineer, you know.